Yes, now you will be struck by this slide as there is another name than my own. It's Dr. Eric Gastinel. Eric Gastinel is a French lawyer. He is member of the Paris Bar and been working in the EUIPO for 12 years. And he was actually the first one to write a book on the European trademark system. And he has prepared these slides. We were both invited to come here. We both wanted to come. But unfortunately, it was not possible for Eric Gastinel to be here. I think some of you already know him from the seminars in Alicante that is conducted for the judges. He is the one running that series of training. So these are his slides that I have been given the opportunity to talk over. I'm going to address what the observatory is doing, and I'm then going to talk a little bit about why is this so important? Why do we spend so many resources inviting judges, prosecutors, law enforcement officers, customs officers, and industry to all these events? Why is it important that EUIPO is going to Africa? Why is it that this is really an important issue? I'll try to address some of these questions. So basically, after this morning, and when we go into the more specificities about the enforcement tools, case law examples, that there is a reason why intellectual property rights are essential. About the observatory, I'm one of the few persons that actually been involved with the observatory since it was created. It came from a council decision under the French presidency in 2008, where it was decided that more had to be done to bring together people working in protection and enforcement of intellectual property rights around Europe. And first, the observatory was placed in the European Commission in Brussels, and then in 2012, it was moved to the European Intellectual Property Office in Alicante. And as you can see, the budget that we are operating with has been increasing because the number of activities that we are doing has been substantially increasing. Basically, the observatory is a network. We have 10 members of the European Parliament, all the member states, a vast array of different international organizations representing industry and the private sector, but we also have representatives from civil society, which is very essential for the observatory. We have the Commission and a number of international organizations, including EUIPO. So basically, the 25+ people working in the observatory as part of the European Intellectual Property Office. We are basically the secretariat, you could say that, of this network where we are bringing together so many stakeholders in intellectual property. We do 4 kinds of things. We try to research what is going on. We research the importance of intellectual property rights to the economy and the impact of intellectual property rights to the economy, and we research the size and problems of counterfeiting and piracy and infringements of intellectual property rights. We study all different kinds of issues beside that as well. We create tools to help enforcement. We have created some databases to support the law enforcement agencies of Europe. We do awareness campaigns, and here do work a little bit in parallel to the EUIPO work, as you've seen before, but targeting a European audience. And we do, and it's very essential, training events, and this is one of, you can say, this event here, and our participation and support of that falls under the last of the type of actions that we do. I think one of the reasons why the observatory was created in the beginning, and I followed it since the very beginning because I was the first Danish government representative in the observatory, was really to gather better data. It was really essential. Well, if we are going to allocate resources, we are going to make a priority of the fight against counterfeiting and piracy, we really need to understand, but what is the size of this phenomenon? So I think the economic studies, that was really lacking. All over the world, there has been attempts to make statistics, to come up with numbers about the impact of this phenomena, but they have not really succeeded. There was some statistics about customs seizures, but that was really it. So I think one of the main reasons for creation of the observatory was really to get better data. But we also conduct a number of non-economic studies. One work I have been doing recently, and you might reflect on that when we are going to talk about the internet tomorrow, we have made a taxonomy of the different ways intellectual property rights are infringed in the online environment, where we have analyzed 25 concrete examples and tried to pull out some general knowledge from these case examples. But we have made many other studies lately, and in the future we will come up with more and more specific studies looking at specific phenomena as well. We have created different databases, and we have created a teaching kit for enforcement officers and prosecutors, and that is being translated into all the member state languages, and it can be used completely freely in training events in the member states. So, and basically the concept is there is a teaching kit of about 200 different slides, and then when used in national events, it can be added on with specificities of case law from that country or legal traditions in that country, but basically there is a teaching kit translated also into Latvian that can be freely used for that kind of events. And I hope the patent office and other institutions will make use of that material. In regards to raising awareness, I think, as Tobias really emphasized, we need to get the youth. The youth are absolutely essential. They're the future. They're the ones that are going to learn the importance of intellectual property rights. When they become innovators, when they start their own businesses, it's really important that they understand how to protect their intellectual property. But also in regards to infringement, we need to teach the youth that it is important that intellectual property rights are protected and enforced. One area that is key is small and medium-sized enterprises, and I think the backbone of European economy are the small and medium-sized enterprises. They are where a lot of the innovation is happening, but it is a challenge for small and medium-sized enterprises to protect and enforce their intellectual property rights. So we have been trying to analyze what are the situations from small and medium-sized enterprises. And one of the findings that we've come up with, that's seen from these companies, the three most important intellectual property rights are domain names, trade secrets, and trademarks. And that's kind of interesting because traditionally a domain name has never been considered to be an intellectual property right. It's a technical registration making it possible to navigate the internet. And trade secrets, well, it is considered an intellectual property, but it's not registered, and the whole idea of a trade secret is actually that it's secret, when intellectual property right is not secret, it's in a registry or it's publicly available. And then come trademarks. And I think we need to understand how these rights are working together to really understand the challenges for small and medium-sized enterprises. Of course, it is very different if you have a company of 25 employees in one EU member state, maybe doing business in 3 or 4 member states, and compare that company's situation with a multinational company with thousands of employees and offices all over the world. I think we need to understand that for the small and medium-sized enterprises, the challenges are, can be quite big, and it's important that we have a well-functioning, cheap and effective system to be able to support these companies that, as I said before, are the backbone of the European economy. And we fund national campaigns, so we try to help if there is a national campaign concerning protection and enforcement of intellectual property rights. Our training events, we do a lot of events. One thing that have been very successful have been regional events for enforcers, and we've had 2 in the Nordic region where the Baltic countries have been invited as well, and there's going to come one next year in Billund in Denmark in the Lego playgrounds, where all the participants will have free access to the Lego playground. So hopefully they will have a very enjoyable time. It's really important that we get this networking going between the customs officers and police officers and prosecutors, so they get to know each other, so they can cooperate. Because one thing that characterizes intellectual property rights is the international aspect. I don't think there's any legal area in existence that is as international as intellectual property rights. And that goes for the enforcement as well, because there are very, very few intellectual property rights infringement cases that are not cross-border. There will be production one place, there will be distribution another place, there will be marketing over the internet, and so on and so on. The international aspect of this is rising, and as we heard from Tobias, I think it's really key. All of the rights are built to some extent on an international framework. We have the TRIPS Convention built into the whole free trade system, so it's really essential that we're getting cross-border networking. And that goes for judges and prosecutors as well. We have created a prosecutors network where we also have representatives from Latvian prosecution. And this is key again, because if we have cases of a cross-border nature where evidence has to be collected in different countries, it's really important that the participants know each other so the cooperation can go as fluently and effectively as possible. We have developed certain messages over the years about this that we are trying to convey to enforcement officers. And I think one of the key messages is that counterfeiting is not a victimless crime. And infringements of intellectual property rights are not without its victims. There are many victims in this field. First of all, there is the industry that has been involved. There is a loss to that industry, direct or indirect, so that's the first part. But it doesn't stop there. It's not only, when we're talking about protection and enforcement of intellectual property rights, it doesn't stop with the companies that holds the rights, or the individuals that holds the rights, the businessmen that holds the rights. There is a further impact. There's an impact on the consumer as well. Many IPR infringements are deceptive to the consumers, are leading the consumers to do choices they would not have otherwise done. And if we're looking at the physical product side, there is a major health and safety aspect connected to intellectual property rights. So very often we will see that the non-original products have a lower quality, do not apply to the health and safety regulations that are in place, and bringing a risk to the consumer. And there is an effect on society, because very often taxes are not paid to the same extent by infringers as non-infringers. The economy as a whole has a negative impact of infringements of intellectual property rights. I think that's a very, very important message to convey, that the negative impact of this kind of activity goes way beyond the individual company. There are victims, but they can be difficult to see. So we have many other violations or torts in the world where the victim is very visible. Here it can sometimes be a little more difficult, but they are there. Now, one of the key points, as I mentioned before, has been reaching out to the judges of Europe. And I think it has been very, very helpful for judges to meet each other from different member states and talk to each other and go over different case examples. We have not only limited the work to the European judges, of course that is key, but we are inviting judges from other countries as well. We have invited from the European Economic Area, we have invited candidate countries for membership of the European Union, and very often also US participation. We've gathered together a network of 850 civil and criminal judges and prosecutors from these countries. And I think that's quite a unique, work to have been able to do to really get people together. We've had more than 30 seminars. It started mostly with protection issues of trademarks and designs. Very, very much targeting on those two key areas. But slowly it has been expanding, and now we will, in the next couple of years, we will slowly expand into much more issues concerning the internet and many more issues concerning copyright as well. So we are not only looking at the protection side, but also on the enforcement side. The format has shown itself to be very successful. The seminars are over 2 days. First are some presentations, and then the judges will sit in groups with representatives of different countries and discuss a case. And they've gotten the case in advance, so they've been able to prepare their views on this case, and then they can sit and discuss with each other. And it's shown itself to be a very fruitful process for judges to sit around to interact like that. And I think it has been very positive for the development of the case law of Europe lately. And it goes on in formats like this. And for the ones of you that haven't attended those seminars already, I really invite you to look out when the seminars are being advertised early every year, if there's something that could be interesting for you to engage with. And simply just for the networking opportunity, it's really fantastic opportunity to have. I'll give you some statistics, a little bit, a few numbers. Now, I'm not going to make it very heavy on statistics, but just try to set this whole discussion in some kind of international frame. Let me go here. There is this statistic that I always find striking. What would you do if you were a criminal and you really wanted to make a lot of money? Let's say you had $1,000 US, you wanted to invest that in some kind of criminal activity. Where would you invest that money? Well, you could go into forged money. That's a good area of criminal activity, and the return on this $1,000 investment would be around $3,300. Credit cards are even better. It would be the double return on investment. Narcotics, now we are going into an area where the risk of being prosecuted and having a very hard prison sentence is now growing. And there's a good profit in that, 6 times more than the forged money. Tobacco is really good, also an area of high sentencing due to the high taxation of tobacco products. Doing illicit trade in tobacco products is very profitable. Software piracy. The risk of being prosecuted is low. the sentencing generally very low for that kind of activity, and the return of investment higher than tobacco smuggling. But if you really want to make money, go into fake pharmaceuticals. That is an area where, again, the risk of being caught, prosecuted, and having a hard prison sentence is low, but the profits can be 100-time return or 300-time return on investment. So, and these are just examples. Of course, you can take bags, clothes, and any other kind of product. Generally, the profits in infringement of intellectual property rights are high, and that makes it very attractive area to get into, because if the risk of a sanction is low and the potential profit is very high, it makes it very attractive area. Now, what is the size of this trade in counterfeit products? How big is it? Is it really worth talking about? Well, it is. It is enormous amounts. In 2007, it was estimated by the OECD that the value of traded products across a customs border was $250 billion US. And we just came out with a new estimate for 2013, where the estimation was $461 billion US. Now, that did not include domestically produced and domestically distributed counterfeit products, and it didn't include non-tangible content being shared over the internet. This was only physical products infringing intellectual property rights traded over a customs border. We can see a rise, a development in this number, and the value in itself is enormous. There have been other estimates as well from the private sector, where the complete picture of counterfeit trade has been taken into consideration, coming up with even higher numbers. But just taking the OECD numbers into consideration, it means basically that in 2007 numbers, 2% of world trade were of counterfeit products, and it has now gone up to 2.5%. Now, the last of the statistics by the OECD was developed together with the EUIPO. So we took the research even further than back in 2007, and we found now that if we're looking simply at the European Union imports, that 5% of the imports into the European Union contains counterfeit and pirated physical products. 5%. 1 in every 20 pieces of commodity is non-genuine, meant for distribution in the European Union. This is an enormous amount of products. On top of that comes the domestically produced counterfeit products or reworked products, basically products where there is an importation of an unbranded product and some fake label is being applied within the European Union. That comes on top of these numbers here, but just 5%, that is an enormous phenomenon. How many other areas of tort, of illegality, of illicit activity has this kind of economic impact? How many can you come up with? It's very hard for me. The value of trade in non-original products infringing intellectual property rights probably even surpasses the sale and distribution of narcotics, which has always traditionally been the biggest crime area as such. We are probably talking about that intellectual property rights infringements have surpassed any other kind of illegality in value and amount. And that basically means that if you look at the gross national products of different countries, it basically means that in 2013, if you said that counterfeit products was a country, it would be amongst the 20 biggest economies in the world. It's of that enormous amount we are talking. We are talking about a very, very big impact on world trade and world economy. But there are many other serious sides to this, because what happens when something becomes very economically attractive? What happens then? It attracts a lot of people. We really don't want to be attracted to it. And there is documentation that the terrorist attack in Madrid some years back had been funded by income from street sales of counterfeit products. Now, this is a difficult subject to talk about this, because you really need good evidence to show that the sale of non-original products is financing terrorism, because that makes it a very sensitive issue. But certainly in that case, there was documentation that had happened. This is an example from the US of counterfeit badges and identification for law enforcement. Just see at the negative impact such activities can have on the local community. Now, as I mentioned before, many products can be of such a low quality that they can have a major impact on health and safety. And this is going back many, many years ago to a very famous disaster with a boat going from Europe to the US. And again, the low quality products here can have major impact. Just look at something like aeroplanes. Just look at something like aeroplanes. They have to be, there has to be spare parts that have to update these aeroplanes. And just imagine if the counterfeit products, the non-original, gets into the supply chain. There was a big case from the US a few years back where computer chips, original computer chips that had been used in the US military, had been reworked, redone, and was then sent back into the legal supply chain. The consequences of things like that can be enormous. So this factor has to be taken into consideration. Many daily products are being counterfeit. These are examples that Eric Gastinel bought in his local supermarket in a very small city just outside of Alicante called El Alted. If you ever comes down with the plane, it's that small city lying very close to the airport. Now, these are non-original infringing products, and just imagine just something like perfumes, how dangerous they can be. They contain chemicals, and the chemical composition can be dangerous to the users. And very often, these counterfeit products are of a very, very low quality. I remember I had a case once in Denmark with these perfumes. And what we did, we sent one of the specimens for chemical analysis. And we could document that the product was dangerous for human consumption. I'm not saying every time there is a case concerning products that are potentially dangerous that they have to be chemically tested. It's also a costly procedure. And there is an infringement anyway, so it's a balance. But certainly for raising awareness purposes, I think it's important once in a while in cases like that, that it's documented how dangerous they are. Even something just like a lamp. We've had many cases of lamps that have been pirated. And we've had some of these lamps tested by a technical institute, and they found a lot of miswirings and low quality wiring in these lamps that could potentially create a fire. So there is this added aspect to intellectual property rights, that what you could call the guarantee functions, for instance, of a trademark, that it gives the guarantee of the consumer that the product has been produced under the supervision and under the under the control of a company that then guarantees to the consumer that the product has a certain quality. And if the product doesn't have that quality, that company is liable. When we are talking about counterfeit products, where is a consumer going to sue anyone for this low quality of products, because you cannot sue the Hugo Boss company in this regard. But had it been originals and had been some chemical fault with the product, the Hugo Boss company would be liable. Here, by using the fake labels, the consumer is left completely without any legal remedy. And that's one of the issues as well. Now I'm pressing the button here.
No, it's okay, for a woman.
So, this is an example that can be a bit surprising. It's also from Eric Gastinel's home city, a counterfeit Ferrari car. Wow, that's quite advanced. It's a car with all the functionalities of a car, and then on top of that has been built in a special garage this counterfeit Ferrari. That's quite mind-boggling, really, to the level of advancedness that IPR infringements are willing to go. One very big area of counterfeits are cigarettes, and here we see the intermingling with other kinds of criminality and other kinds of illegality, because of course there will be a combination with tax evasion and VAT evasion here, because the taxation on cigarettes is so high. So here the potential profit is also enormous, and we are talking about millions of cigarettes every year that is being that's being marketed within the European Union. One big area of counterfeit products is medication, and of course very known examples have been the Viagra pills, but there are case examples from the European Union of any kind of medication that has been counterfeit. And there are examples that the legitimate supply chain of the apothecaries and the hospitals have been breached. There was a very big case in the UK a few years back where a defendant was imprisoned for 10 years due to infiltration of the legal supply chain. He was running a legal parallel import business in the southern part of the UK, and he had direct access to the legal supply chain. And they were very dangerous, potentially very dangerous, these pharmaceuticals, and they included schizophrenia medication, cancer medication, and other kinds of medication. An extremely serious breach of intellectual property rights, as well as the medical regulation. These are examples of different kinds of products. Sauna heaters that can catch fire, and the number of examples of dangerous non-original products are almost endless and can be detrimental to health and safety of the European consumers. Fake milk in China. And the next one, fake eggs. Can there really be a business in making counterfeit eggs? Yes, there can. It is true. It happens. There are examples from China of production where there is an economic profit in making counterfeit eggs and being sold with the legitimate brand. They break very easily. You don't want to eat them. I can assure you that. You wouldn't have any want of that. There is nothing so cheap. There is not the product so cheap, so small, that there is not a profit in counterfeiting it. Selling it to the same price as the original, chewing gums, any kind of product, there is a profit, even in matchboxes and everything else. There is a profit in everything. It's not only the luxury brands that are being counterfeited. Today, it's any kind of product. Now, very often, the cases, either if they're civil or criminal, it doesn't really matter, can be quite complex. And sometimes they involve many different kinds of IP. And very often we say to the private investigators or lawyers and to the law enforcement officers, go for the easiest identifiable IPR, very often trademarks, and concentrate on that. Don't necessarily overcomplicate or overburden a case. Do it as simple as possible, and the potential for having a successful litigation will be higher. Yesterday, I got a court ruling from Denmark, which I found extremely interesting. It had been some people who had imported legitimate Coca-Cola from another EU member states and not paid the special taxes on that soda. What they did, they took out the labels from that had the special language and the special information from that other member state, and they had applied Danish language logos, and then they were selling them as the genuine article. And of course, there was a violation of a variety of different pieces of legislation. Now, the discussion was the prosecution also going to prosecute an IPR infringement? And they decided to do that, so they also indicted for trademark violation and for copyright violation, because very often the labels will be artistic as well. There will be some originality in the labels, so they will also very often be copyright protected. So when I found that a very interesting approach to add that aspect to a case that was fundamentally a tax evasion case. But it really illustrates a little bit the point from this slide that very often we will see a combination of violations of different pieces of legislation. So very often there will be a violation of health and safety rules, there can be money laundering, there can be tax evasion and other kinds of violations. If you take something like pesticides, I saw that was some of Tobias' slides looked into pesticides, which is a big area for counterfeits as well. There is specific legislation concerning pesticides. So we will very often see a combination of different kinds of violations of legislation. And well, it can be different from member state to member states and how different companies approach the issue. Generally, it's my view to take the illegality that is easiest to prove and then build the case around that. But others have a different approach, and this example from Denmark took the approach of adding everything into the case, so every aspect was really scrutinized under that case that then is now under appeal. But I found that a very interesting approach to actually add the copyright infringement into this tax case. One last point I have to make here is the follow the money approach. The follow the money approach has become like a mantra of the European Union now in regards to intellectual property rights infringement. And it goes different ways. It goes as the criminal aspect, follow the money or money laundering, confiscate the proceeds of crime. But it's also really looking at the approach of looking at the intermediaries that are facilitating this kind of activity and trying to build up know your customer regimes, voluntary cooperation measures that is able to prevent some of these activities. But when something is a business and profits are high, it is essential to look at the money trail. It is the key. We don't have to forget that. Why? Either it's a civil case, an administrative case, a customs case, or a criminal case. Focus on the money trail is really, really important, and understanding what has been the economic driver in this specific business model that is being scrutinized in this case and at the end of the day will be presented at the courts of law. That is very, very essential. When we come to the internet issues, it's my point as well, we also need to look at the technical aspects of it, but with any intellectual property rights infringement case, we need to focus on the money. I will stop now, and I hope you enjoyed Eric Gastinel's slides. I'm not able to give them quite as entertaining as himself, and as you can see, he's been out in his local shops finding the examples himself, and when he showed me the fake Ferrari, I was quite shocked. So, thanks a lot for your attention, and that was the first for me. Thanks a lot.